Don't miss the beginnings of the Eldar.
Spiky bits.
What's up, Hobby Maniacs? Rob Baer back with you again, checking out the old Second Edition Codex Eldar book from way back in the day. This one's from 1994. Now this was, Second Edition was a really cool time for Warhammer. It's when the game kind of went from being a RPG based, slow and kind of methodical narrative sort of type deal to more of a kind of faster paced, not as fast as we know today, but faster paced game on the tabletop that it still took an afternoon to play, but it was still very fun and enjoyable. There was a lot of mechanics back then that existed that are around today, like Overwatch. Didn't quite work the way it did back then as it does today. You could set a model on Overwatch and it would have a chance to fire if something got into its field of fire, line of sight. You could opt to do an out of phase kind of sequence and shoot things. Now the Eldar force itself, or range or faction, had a lot of models by this point, so it only kind of made sense for them to get sort of an army rules or list. Now this book was written by Rick Priestley, the guy that had very much a lot to do with creating Warhammer 40k in the first place, so he took a definite liking to the Eldar, with artwork by John Blanche, Wayne England, the late Wayne England, Jess Goodwin and Mark Gibbons, all those big names. Stories by Bill King. Oh man, I remember a lot of his fantasy novels and short stories from back in the day. Great stuff there. So you can see here in the picture the old plastic jet bikes, and you can also see the old flight stands right there. It looks very similar to some stuff we saw in Battletech back in the day. A lot of metal figures. The Warp Spider's still the same as they are currently in 2017. There's Eldrad up at the top. Down here you got that Avatar, the old Rogue Trader Farseer model, which just recently is coming back to Warhammer 40k for a made-to-order release. There is another one too. Actually, that's the Necromunda Farseer, if I remember correctly. Nope, the Necromunda one has the large staff and he's running. So that is the Rogue Trader Farseer right there. Contents-wise, the book is only about 88 pages long, but it's divided up by kind of fluff sections. And even in the bestiary back in the day, you would have some of the stat lines and stuff for each model, and then it jumps into all of these sections over here, which is going to be your war gear, your weapons, your armor, the army list itself with the restrictions to how many percentages of things you have to have in there. And then it gets into the nice section of painted miniatures. So here's one very inspiring piece of artwork that you may or may not have seen in the past. I love this piece, the particular piece here. Again, a Mark Gibbons artwork of the Avatar over top of a space marine as he has burned him to cinders. First off in this book is going to be all of the great fluff, talking about the Infinity Circuits, the Webway, the Eldar Path, the Path of the Warrior, of course, all of the different exarchs or aspects. And then it gets into the Fall themselves, the Harlequins, which had a lot of models but no particular rules. They came out in a journal, Citadel Journal from back in the day, little small annual books that would have a lot of interesting stuff in them, some rule sets and things. They were actually pretty powerful back then. If you had the book and you had the models, you had a very powerful force on the tabletop. The Exodites, of course, the country versions, we'll say, of the Eldar, the ones that have chose to rough it in some of the old planets that had still survived in things that were currently claimed by the Eldar themselves, and then some of the Wraith constructs, etc. So lots and lots of fluff in here. Like I said, they put the little stat lines for each model in here. And it's going to look very similar to everything we've seen up until 7th edition. You've got a movement value, which I guess is just kind of coming back now in 8th. Didn't used to have that. Everything's just kind of assumed to move, infantry moved a certain distance unless it was beast and cavalry, etc., etc. Weapon skill and ballistic skill, you had to subtract it. Now it's just hits on 3+, 2+, whatever. on down to your leadership values and things like that. And then you get to the painted miniature section. You start to see some familiar faces and some unfamiliar faces, I'm sure. There's Eldrad, just recently replaced in plastic. The Avatar still currently the model, unless you count the 4-year-old one. Then you've got some Guardian models here, and these were pewter Guardian models, believe it or not. The plastic ones are the current ones that are out right now, came out in the late 90s. They've got the 2-part legs, 2 arms, shuriken, and then a head and a backpack. The jet bike, though, was plastic back then, and then anti-grav platforms, a couple of warlocks, and then it gets into the actual Phoenix Lords themselves, which may or may not be the original Phoenix Lords. In the case of Morgan Raw, I believe he is. Asurman is not. Karandras definitely isn't. He is the second. The first Scorpion Exarch is Drazahar of the Dark Eldar, believe it or not. So, at least that's how the fluff goes. And then you've got the Warp Spiders, the older Dark Reapers that have been since replaced, and more miniatures in here. So some great looking stuff. Some things you have probably seen, some things you have not. There's the Eldar Dreadnought. We know him to be the Wraith Lord now. Eldar Warwalker right there. Looks way different in pewter, of course. Eldar Viper in plastic had not come out. One of the biggest, most ambitious plastic kits for Games Workshop was the Eldar Falcon, which came out right around this time. I don't think there's actually rules in here, if I don't remember. And all the War Gear cards that you could play on stuff. Kind of like what we have for data cards now. I would say these are more things that you bought and you could put on characters, but they were done in kind of like a stratagem kind of style, because you had to pay points and then they had it the whole time, so it didn't go away either. Armory section, then it gets into the weapons, and then we should get to the army list with lots of fluff kind of thrown in here and there. Where is the army section? There's the weapons. Special characters section. Special characters were a bad word back then. Here's the army selection. Okay, so they had an extra section here in this one. So normally it was just character squads and support, but this book had the Harlequins because of the robustness of the line, which you couldn't have more than one. If you wanted to play the Harlequins as a standalone army, you had to use the Citadel Journal article, which came out around the same time there. But this is how you used to, this is basically your force organization back then. And then it goes into more artwork and the squads themselves. You could even take Exodate Dragon Knights. The Dino Riders was a thing back in the day, believe it or not. They had all sorts of cool things. Not necessarily things that have made it to today, other than conversion format, but it was always cool to see some dope things on the tabletop back then. Shadowseer, Solitaire, and Deathchester, of course, household names these days after all of the Harlequin releases of 2014, I want to say. Maga and Ra, all the special characters and their fluff breakdown in here. And then Eldrad, Janzar. And then it gets to the back section. You're probably like, what the heck is this? Well, this was your catalog section. You couldn't exactly pick up your phone and surf the internet and get the part you needed if you wanted to place an order or some sort of conversion you wanted to make. This was actually a benefit to have this handy if you wanted to pick something up and then go ahead and convert it out, or if you're missing a piece, you could call customer service and tell them what piece you were missing. But this is very handy to have. There you can see the Farseer that just recently came back. That's the Rogue Trader one. Aspect Warriors, Exarchs, the heavy weapon platform, which now we have a sport weapon platform, and the Eldar Guardians with partial plastic arms and accessories right there. So it wasn't a full plastic kit, but just like the Space Marines of the same time period, you could put plastic arms on them and have a little bit more posability. It wasn't a completely plastic kit. And here you can see the Eldar, the forces of the Eldar, arrayed for battle against the Space Marines on some of that custom terrain they have created back in the day. And here, you know, way over 20 years later, 22, 23 years later, we're very lucky to have such a great line of terrain from Games Workshop to be able to put on our tabletops, and also all the other third-party companies have great things out there. We used to, the hobby didn't stop with your figures. It would just be the first step, and then you would have to create a table of your own using your hobby muscles there. So overall, a very cool book in general with lots of lore and background on the old Eldar. Of course, a lot of it has been retconned since then, but if you have a chance to pick this book up, you can still find them for relatively cheap, 20-25 bucks, what you pay for a book today. But if you're gonna buy any piece of older lore for your faction, you might want to go back and check out the second edition books. I guarantee you, you will get more reward and richness in your hobby reading through these than you will any collector set for 10 times the price today. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching, folks. Make sure you subscribe to this channel if you like these features. There's a whole ton of retro videos and flashbacks here on the channel as well. And head on over to the longwar.net. That's the home of the battle reports for exclusive content, early access videos, and more. Become a veteran of the Long War today.